You are listening to the Waking Up to Purpose podcast with Lily Badcock in association with lilybadcock.com. What if every challenge you've ever faced was for a purpose? What if every perceived failure was in fact you stepping ever closer to the life you were born to live? I'm Lily Badcock, and I'm here to let you know that you were born with a divine purpose in your heart. And you're here because you know that's true. The process of awakening can be tough. Fired up and inspired one minute and then overwhelmed and lost the next. I've created this podcast to share with you every aspect of my own journey to purpose, as well as the stories of others who have walked the same path. Fear and doubt can place a lot of uncertainty in our minds, but here's what's true. You are needed. Your story matters. Wake up. Rise up. Together we can. Hi everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It's Lily here for another episode of the Waking Up to Purpose podcast. And I'm so excited to be back for another week with this show. And I'm so excited to let you know, first off the bat, that I interviewed someone so exciting this week, and the episode is going to be coming out at the same time as this one. Her name is Jo Milmine, and she is the entire reason why this podcast exists and why my previous podcast got started. So my previous podcast being the Confidence Academy. And it felt like a real full circle moment to get her on the podcast because, like I say, without her, my words would never be going out into the world. I never would have had the outlet to spread the message that I've been spreading since 2017. And it just struck me that it's so cool how life lines up. First of all, the people that are going to help us. And the funny thing about that as well, and we talk about this on the episode itself, so I won't go into it too much here, but the funny thing about it is, at the point I found her course, so basically Jo did a bundle for the FEA, which is the Female Entrepreneur Association, and every month there's a little training bundle to help entrepreneurs to build their businesses, right? And Jo had done the podcast bundle all of these years ago, and I'd got this weird nudge inside of me to start a podcast. I had no idea what I was doing, and because I'm part of the FEA, obviously I thought, well, let me go and see if there's a bundle, and there was, and so I followed it, and the rest is history, right? But at the time I consumed that content, I had no idea what was going to come from that. I had no idea the impact that the podcasts were going to have. And when I talk about the Confidence Academy podcast in particular, it was nuts how quickly that podcast reached thousands of people. I remember somebody screenshotting me a picture of iTunes New and Noteworthy a few weeks after I'd launched it, saying, oh my God, you're on iTunes New and Noteworthy, congratulations. And I was like, I don't even know what that is, but it sounds exciting. Thank you so much. And it was a very profound moment for me because up until that point, I'd really struggled with getting my message out into the world. And I'd really got into a place of beating myself up because I wasn't where I thought I should be. And this is perfectly going to lead us into the conversation that I wanted to have today. It was the end of October, and it was the end of October 2017, and I was already starting to feel the dread kicking in that the end of year was coming. So I don't know about you, but the way that my brain works, or the way that I am, is I love the start of anything. So New Year is my favourite time. I love Mondays because it's the start of a week. I just love any kind of clean slate. I love getting new diaries, new journals, anything where it's a blank front page. It feels like it's a reset. You can start again. I'm all for that. And then I get really down on the flip side of that. So I don't like the end of the month. The end of the month feels crappy to me. And the end of the year feels worse. And so and this was 2017, and I was already, even though it wasn't even November yet, I was already starting to realise that I'd not achieved a lot of what I'd wanted to achieve that year. I'd got very frustrated with myself. I felt like I hadn't taken action. I was telling myself that I hadn't done enough. I was asking myself, what's wrong with you? Why can't you break through? Why can't you just do what it is you're saying you're going to do? You know, you talk all the time about creating life on your terms and about, you know, believing the dreams that are inside of you. And if you really believe that, then why aren't they coming true? Why are you still struggling? And this is how I was talking to myself. And I had this slight epiphany. And if you've listened to the Confidence Academy podcast, you'll have heard me tell this story already. But I just had this moment where I stopped beating myself up for a second. And I thought to myself, look, it's the end of October. You've got November, you've got December, and you've got a choice, right? You can either write off this whole year now and, you know, have your own pity party and bury your head in the sand until New Year rolls around, when you can make all your plans again and you can feel better. Or you can just realise that any shift that happens in a nanosecond. It's not this big, you know, flash of light with fanfares and trumpets blowing and, you know, angels floating down. And it's not that. You know, when people have these breakthroughs, it never comes all at once. It's just tiny little micro decisions, tiny little micro choices that we make along the way. And often from a place of feeling like we don't know what we're doing. But it's those micro steps in a slightly different direction that can completely change the course of where you're going and what you're doing. And so in that moment, thank God, I had the presence of mind to just stop and go, look, you can either continue to beat yourself up till the end of the year and then you can start again in January, or you can just start again now. You can just recognise that the shift is going to come in a nanosecond. And in fact, maybe it's already happening. And you've still got 2 months of the year left. What if everything could pivot on this moment? What if everything could change in this moment right now? If you could just believe that that was possible. And that's when I made this decision with myself that I was going to pay attention to the nudges I was getting. So I decided that because I have 1,000,001 ideas and probably more in any given moment. And so often I would just talk myself out of doing it, right? And I would have these ideas and then I would tell myself, oh, it's not possible, you can't do that, like blah, blah, blah. I'd make a whole list and then invariably wouldn't follow through. So after that little epiphany, I just decided, right, the next time you get an idea, you're going to do it. It doesn't matter if you think you can. It doesn't matter if you don't know how. You're going to find a way. You're going to push through. And you're going to see where that takes you. Because to be honest, the other way hasn't really worked. You feel like crap. So why not give it a go, right? And I don't know what the time scale was, but when I'm thinking about it now, it feels like it almost happened in the next thought, when I just thought to myself, podcast. Now, I don't know why. I must have heard one, or somebody must have mentioned the word podcast or something. Because at that point, I wasn't listening to podcasts. It wasn't really something that was on my radar. I'd heard the word. I had friends that had a podcast, but I didn't really know what it was. And so when I got this idea, like, I could probably do a podcast, immediately I was like, well, I don't know what a podcast is. So how am I going to do it? But because I'd made that rule for myself that I wasn't allowed to talk myself out of these ideas, I thought, right, well, I'd better go figure it out then. And that's how I found Joe's bundle. And like I say, the rest is history. And the really profound thing, and like I say, we did talk about it on the episode, but the profound thing was when I started that bundle and when I uploaded my first ever podcast episode, I had no idea of the impact it was going to have, not just on the people listening, but more so on me. By doing that podcast, by pushing through that resistance and by ignoring those voices in my head that told me I didn't know how and that told me I wasn't good enough and that told me all of the things that they were trying to tell me, by pushing through all of that, something in me shifted and I stopped being somebody that was a victim of their fears and I became somebody who instead made a decision and went after it no matter what. And I was right. It's funny. It's almost like I'd had that premonition that that shift was going to just happen in a nanosecond. And it happened the moment I thought, I wonder if I could do a podcast. And when I had Jo on this week, I asked her, did you understand Or did you have any idea of the impact your work was going to have in the world? Because, like I say, I'm not going to go into it. You can listen to the episode to find out who she is and why she does what she does. But basically, she has a hugely successful podcast. And through a chain of events, she just ended up doing this bundle for the FEA. And of course, at the time she was recording that, she had no idea of the impact that was going to have. And there's a moment in our interview where I said to her, you gave me my voice, because until I had that podcast, I felt invisible in the world, and I felt frustrated because I'd been through this anxiety journey and this losing of confidence and rebuilding it again. And, you know, really from a place of never believing I was ever going to have it back. And through doing that bundle and through launching this podcast, I found my voice. I actually found the thing that enabled me to reach people from all around the world. I've lost count of how many countries the Confidence Academy is now being listened to. It's over 30 countries around the world. And even the Waking Up to Purpose podcast, I mean, we're only a handful of episodes in, and already we're up to about 7 or 8 countries, I think, that this is being downloaded in. Hello to everybody listening. And I just think it's amazing. And so it's an amazing interview. You're going to love it. It's hugely inspiring. I mean, some of the things that Jo shares in that episode were blowing my mind. And I said to her at the end, do you know what a powerful spiritual teacher you are? And she kind of just shrugged and was like, don't know, because she doesn't call herself a spiritual teacher. She, you know, she does her job. She does her podcast, and she's living her life the way it is. And we even have the conversation about, you know, is spirituality a really big thing for you? And for her, it's not really. She said it's something that's now coming onto the radar just now. But I think so many people think that purpose is this spiritual term, and that if you're not spiritual, or if you're not religious, or if you don't have that belief, then somehow you've skipped the line of when they were giving out purposes. It's just not true. Everyone has a purpose. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. It doesn't matter what you're inspired by. It doesn't matter if you've never, you know, even looked at a religion or anything. It really doesn't matter. What matters is your ability to have faith. And I say that as a completely separate term to anything spiritual or religious. It's just your ability to have faith that you are someone that matters, that your story is something that matters, and that you are here to do something epic in this world, whatever that looks like for you. So that's an entire tangent I've gone off right off the bat. I made notes for this. Do you know, I was going to say this as well. Every single week, and I'm sure I've said this already, every single week I sit down to record this podcast, and I never pre-plan it because that's not how I work. And yet every week, right before I hit record, I have this moment of, oh God, I'd better write some notes. I'd better put a structure together. I'd better have a 1, 2, 3 point to talk about. And, you know, oh, what if I ran out of things to say? As if that would ever happen. And so I've scribbled these notes, and I've not looked at them once. So there are so many lessons coming through right now for you, hopefully that you're getting. Number one, never, ever, ever, ever underestimate the power of what you do, regardless of what it is, right? Never underestimate the power of what you do. Never underestimate your ability to change somebody else's life. And it doesn't matter whether you believe you are doing that or whether you don't even give it a second thought. The fact of the matter is, you existing here on the planet Earth positively impacts at least one other human being in the world. And in most cases, many, many more than that, right? There's an amazing story that I just want to share around that, because it was, you know, back when I had this podcast, not this podcast, but the Confidence Academy one, and I'd launched my first episode. For a start, the first episode was supposed to be an interview, and then we had to postpone it. So I'd made this big thing about telling everybody that the podcast was going to launch on this specific day, and I'd geared it up. And so when the interview couldn't go ahead, it would have been so easy for me to say, oh, well, you know, whatever, I'll just launch it the next week. But because I'd told so many people I was going to do it, I almost felt like, oh, I have to put something out there. And also because I had this rule for myself that I wasn't allowed to back out. I wasn't allowed to tell myself, oh, that can't happen. So the fact that the lady was unable to do the interview as we'd scheduled was not a good enough reason for me not to put it out there. I'd already decided, I'd already made it a thing. And so I literally hit go on my laptop and I scribbled down 10 ways that I cope with anxiety. And I talked about that. And that was my first episode. And then I did a few after that were interviews. And I can remember when people were coming on for their interview before we went live, I was apologising to people and saying, like, I don't think anyone's listening to this podcast yet, but hopefully they will one day. So, you know, thank you so much for giving me your time. I'm so sorry that I haven't got a huge audience and all of this. I was so apologetic about it. And then it was only last year somebody signed up for a private one-to-one with me. And when she came onto the Zoom call, she was so like giggly and giddy and saying, oh my God, it's you. I can't believe I'm actually talking to you. And I was like, what? Like, are you having a laugh? And as it turned out, she told me that she was in a very, very dark space and her husband had been very worried. And so he started looking around for resources that he could send her that might help. And he got onto podcasts and somehow he found mine. And he sent her the link to the episode. And she said that episode changed my life. It changed how I thought about myself. It changed how I felt about what I was going through. It picked me up from being on the floor. And I was like, oh my God, this is so brilliant. Like, can you remember the episode it was? And she said, yeah. She said it was a really simple episode. You just gave 10 steps to overcome anxiety. And I was like, holy shit, that was my first ever episode. And it turned out that in the week I got the nudge to launch that podcast was the week her husband went looking for something and found my episode. And that was what he sent her. So at the moment in time that I was over here in the UK going, oh, nobody's listening. It's not getting anywhere. Should I even bother carrying on? You know, apologising to the guests that nobody was even listening. At the same time, somewhere in America, like millions of miles away from here, was a lady whose life got changed for the better because I got over my own bullshit and I pressed record and just shared 10 things that helped me with my anxiety. And I'm sharing that because so often we feel like we are failing. So often we feel like we're not doing a good job, or we think we're invisible, or we think that all of our effort is for nothing. And we wonder why we do it. We wonder why we bother. And in some cases, we even quit. And I hope that if you're listening to this right now, it's going to inspire you not to. And, you know, at any point, if you need a break, if you need to just take a step back, then you absolutely must do that. But don't for 1 minute ever believe that your words don't have power, that the things you're being guided to don't have the ability to not only change the world, but really more than that, to actually deliver the thing that you're asking for in the first place. Back then, I wanted impact. I wanted people to hear my words. I wanted to share my story. I didn't want any more people to suffer with their anxiety and their mental health in the way that I had, alone and believing that there was no hope. I didn't want that. And so I felt so frustrated that I couldn't tell more people what I knew. And it was just such an amazing reminder in that moment to go, holy crap, in the moment I was convinced that it was useless, you were listening to it and being helped. And it really, I forget that sometimes. I don't know why that story has come out of me today, but we obviously needed it, right? In fact, I needed it because I find this goes in cycles, and I get there again from time to time, and I've been there recently, and I've got all of these things that I do. I do this podcast, I do my live streams, I have my email series, I have, countless things that I put out into the world. And I'm so guilty of sometimes looking at the download numbers and feeling like, oh, it's not working, like nobody's really watching, or if they are watching, they're not really saying anything, or they're not taking action. And it's so easy to tell ourselves that bullshit story that just because somebody didn't write a comment, that your words didn't help them. So if you are anything like me and you get into self-sabotage and you get into feeling like maybe it's not worth it and maybe you should just quit, then I hope this episode is going to help you to feel inspired not to do that and to instead come back to the reason why you do it in the first place. I was watching a Gary Vee clip earlier, and I'm sure I've mentioned him on this before as well. I do love Gary Vee. And he actually had a 15-year-old kid on his Tea with Gary Vee series. And this kid said he was worried that he was going to put all of this time and effort into creating his content, and then at some point he was maybe going to regret all of that time and effort, especially if it didn't work. And what Gary Vee said to him was such truth and such a great message and something I certainly needed to hear. And he said, you know, you don't do it for the prize. You don't do it for the end goal. You do it for the process. You know, how could you ever regret doing something you love to do? So if you're doing what you love to do, how could you ever regret that, whether it worked or not? And it was like, oh, yeah, I get it. You know, I realised a very, very, very long time ago that I couldn't quit doing this even if I wanted to. I will talk about this stuff till the cows come home, every minute of every day of my life until the day I die, because it lights me up. I know it's what I'm here for, and I love the impact it has on people when I see it. And it's very easy when you're not seeing the return, like if you're not getting the emails or if people don't show up on your live streams or whatever it may be, it's so easy to kid yourself that it's all for nothing and that nobody's paying attention. But, you know, as long as you're consistent and as long as you keep putting your message and your story out into the world, people will hear it. And they might not hear it the day or the week or even the month or the year that you drop it, but they're going to hear it one day. And, you know, if I had allowed that failed interview on that first podcast to derail me and to stop me from putting an episode out there, I never would have done that episode with 10 steps to overcome anxiety. It never would have reached that lady in America. She never would have got the help that she needed in the moment she needed it. Maybe she would have found it elsewhere, but maybe not. You know, that podcast started because somebody from our town took his life, and I was so devastated at the thought that somebody would take their life believing that the mistakes they had made couldn't be redeemed. I couldn't bear the thought that somebody would take their life believing that they couldn't correct their wrongs or that they couldn't overcome the mistakes they'd made or the poor choices they'd made. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, if only you'd been sharing what you know, maybe he would have heard it and maybe that wouldn't have happened. And that is what booted me up the bum to get it out there in the first place. So a lot is being said there. I'm now going to turn to the notes that I wrote because I did write them. And I think it's so funny. I even wrote at the top of the thing, on the show today we have, like, when have I ever started an episode like that? But anyway, that's not what we have on the show today because I've just babbled on and it is what it is. I should know by now that these are channeled sessions for you. I just turn on the microphone and the message comes through. I need to learn to trust that. Absolutely. Feel free to kick my ass around that, by the way, if you're listening to this. Feel free to send me a message and kick my butt and be like, yeah, just remember who you are. Like, I say it to other people enough. I need to remember it myself. But there was something that dropped into my head earlier, and this was the note I wrote down because I did want to touch on this in today's episode as well. So I went out to Waitrose this morning. It's, what day is it here? Is it no, it's Saturday. God, I don't even know what the day is. It's Saturday, right? So my husband was playing golf this morning, and before he left, I said, I just want to pop out and get some food because it's so much easier to go when it's just me and I don't have to take the kids. And besides which, it was pissing with rain and I didn't want all of that hassle. So I had about half an hour to do it, right? So I went out and I did the shop and I got it done and I was driving home. And I was feeling a little bit fraught because I knew I only had half an hour. I knew he wanted to leave on time and I was feeling like I don't want to make him late and I didn't want to inconvenience him by being late back from the shop and, you know, and all of that hassle that would have brought. And so my mind started to go down a rabbit hole of, everything in my life has to be squeezed into these pockets of time. Like everything I need to do has to be, you know, kind of slotted in around everybody else and what everybody else wants and needs. And I started to get into a bit of a boohoo, poor me kind of space. And I very, very quickly snapped myself out of it, as I remembered that the day before or the day before that, I'd gone out in the morning and he'd had the kids, and I'd actually gone and met my friend for a coffee for hours and hours, and it was lovely. So straight away it was like, well, what you've just told yourself isn't actually true, is it? Now, if I had not checked myself at that point, and if I had continued to let myself believe that that was actually true, I would have gone into a very resentful space. I would have begun to really, feel resentful that, no time was my own, that my time wasn't being honoured and that my needs weren't being met and blah, blah, blah. But I very, very quickly was able to stop and go, is that true? Actually, no, it's not. You've had to squeeze in a shopping trip this morning, but even that was because I chose to, right? So it got me thinking that we so often will look at a situation through a particular lens depending on how we're feeling at the time. So our feelings are really like lenses. And what I'm seeing in my mind right now is, when you go to the optician and you have an eye test and they put those wacky, massive, glasses. You can't even call them glasses. It's just a huge contraption that goes on your face. And then they slot in and out. What do they call those little round things? They're little round bits of glass. Anyway, they've got a name and I can't remember what they're called. Slides? No. Anyway, you get the idea. So you wear this big contraption on your face, and then the optician will put different little circular slides into the contraption. And each slide, it represents a different strength of prescription, right? And that's how they find out what glasses you need, right? I see our feelings a bit like those glass slides. And if you're slotting in an emotion of feeling fraught or hard done by or anything like that, then when you've got that in your lens, everything that you see through that lens is going to be tinted with that colour. Does that make sense? So when you constantly feel like you're being hard done by and that your needs aren't being met and you're not being heard, whatever version of, being hard done by you might be sitting with at that moment, it's really easy to then see the entire picture through that lens. But all it takes is for that lens to be removed and for you to replace it with another lens before you can start to feel differently about it. And so as I was driving home, I thought, wow, for the person who feels constantly hard done by and like maybe they're unlucky, I wonder, is that because that's true? Or is it because that's just how they view the situation based on how they're feeling? So, for someone who, and we all know these people, maybe you are one of them, right? We all know these people who just feel like life takes a dump on them constantly. They just feel like they're constantly being hard done by. Like, even if they experience something good, eventually it turns bad. And, it's just it's the glass half empty kind of person who they just constantly feel like life is hard for them. Is it true that life is hard for some people? Is it true that some people are lucky and other people are unlucky? Or is it just that some people have the ability to switch the lens through which they see their situation? Because I've definitely seen and heard many, many, many motivational speeches from people who could have been considered unlucky and yet who are some of the happiest, most peaceful and grateful people in the world. And I just thought back even to this morning that there's always more than one way to see a situation. So this morning, before I went and did the mad shopping dash, I woke up early after an awful night. Sophia was screaming at 1 a.m. for no good reason. She just wanted to go downstairs and eat 2 bites of a banana and watch TV. Why wouldn't you at 1 a.m., right? So I was hanging out of my ass tired this morning, but I got myself up and I actually managed to sit with my journal in some peace and quiet. Now, I was thinking of that as I was driving home, and I thought, well, I felt lucky this morning. I felt, oh my God, I'm lucky. I've woken up early. Sophia was still asleep. Kevin was still asleep. The boys were awake, but they don't really get in my way in the morning. They're really, really good. Like, everyone just sits and chills. And so I felt lucky because I was able to sit and write my journal and get my head straight. And then I realised as I was thinking about this, I so easily could have seen it another way. And I have done in the past as well. I easily could have watched Kevin be asleep and felt pissed off that he was getting a lion and I wasn't. So it's the same situation where I got up early and he stayed in bed, and it would have been easy to see it from either of those perspectives. But one of those perspectives makes me feel lucky, and the other one of those perspectives makes me feel overlooked and not honoured. And it's all down to me. Do you see what I'm saying here? So often it's all down to us. It's all down to our perception and the lens that we are choosing to view the situation through. Now, that's not to say that there aren't going to be situations where somebody is, going to do something to you, or something's going to happen to you that's really going to rock you. But I still say you have power over your own perception. You can still choose the outcome of what that means for you. It doesn't mean you have to lie down and take something if it's not good for you. It doesn't mean that you have to, like, if you really feel that your needs are not being met, it doesn't mean that you have to stay in that situation. You definitely get to speak up and honour that. But there are so many times we will tell ourselves that we're in a bad spot, or we tell ourselves we're unlucky, or we tell ourselves that, whatever we're telling ourselves. And that's only one version of the story. So the mantra for this week, and I know that I haven't, well, maybe there was a mantra last week. I just don't think I announced it officially, but I try to give you a mantra. I try and give you a thinking point each week anyway. And really, it was just that, just consider that there's always another way to see the situation. Your feelings are really what determine what feels true. So your feelings are really like those lenses that are being slotted in. They are the deciding factors. Your feelings are what decide whether you are lucky or whether you're not lucky. So the mantra for this week is, I can and I will choose out of anything that does not serve me, no matter how true it feels. So what I mean by that is there a situation right now that you're really struggling with, or that's really weighing heavy on you, that feels very, very true? It feels absolutely true because there are tangible physical things that are backing up this belief, right? Is there another way that you can perceive that situation though? Make it like a fun game, right? Make it a fun game, even if it's a really serious thing. Like, let's say that you just lost your job. I know this is happening to a lot of people right now because of lockdown, and people are on furlough, but then some people are having their contracts severed and all kinds of things. So let's just take that as an example. Now, losing your job, having your income cut off, yes, absolutely. That's going to feel like shit. It's going to be very, very scary. Try and stay with me here though. If you stay with that lens of, this is unlucky, this is scary, I can't survive, this is bad news, blah, 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 everything you do is going to be through that lens. You're going to stay looking through that lens, which means it's going to be very difficult for you to find the opportunities that are all around you to move forward. It comes back to faith. If you can have faith that you are always being guided, if you can have faith that you're always okay, then you have to believe and know that the answers are there already for you to find. Now, what if you just take out the lens of feeling hard done by, unlucky, or whatever word you want to use, and instead switch it up for a lens that allows you to see the good side in everything? And then ask yourself, what can I see? What can I see now I've shifted this perception? Even if it's just for a minute, just to shut Lily up because she keeps saying that this is possible. Like, if you had to find another way to see the situation, then what would that way be? Right? You can always go back to the pity party later if that feels better. But ask yourself, is there some other way of seeing this situation that enables me to feel better about it? If you've ever played, and I haven't played this game, but I think my kids had it on the phone at one time. Was it Pokemon, where you could go out and about and Pokemons would show up on the app and it looked like they were really there in front of you when you looked at it through the lens of your phone? It's a little bit like that. think of your opportunities and your, the answers to the questions that you're looking for. Think of them like these Pokemon that you have to find. And you've got this app on your phone and you're scanning it around. Now, if you don't have the right settings on that app, you're not going to find the opportunities. All you're going to find is more strain, more struggle. So switch out that. I don't know anything about the apps. This is probably a terrible analogy, but you get the idea, right? Just shift it for a second and go, okay, how could this potentially work out for me? Let's just use our imagination for a minute, even if it doesn't feel true. And even if you can't see how that would be true, just play the game anyway and just see what that does for your energy. And crucially, see what that does for your ability to then have an idea. And then maybe adopt the same thing that I adopted when I started the first podcast, which is trust yourself to follow those nudges and don't let yourself talk yourself out of them. So don't tell yourself you can't do it. Don't tell yourself that you don't understand how it works, therefore it can't work. Just follow the breadcrumbs, follow that nudge, take the action and see what happens. And I want you to tell me what happens as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I have a couple of things to tell you about. So you already know about the On Purpose Mastermind. This is my brand new signature program that will be running on a yearly basis. It's a high level way to work with me that isn't one-to-one, although you can upgrade to VIP, but it's done in an intimate small group setting and it is a mastermind. So we're going to kick off on the 6th of July. And we're going to work together for 12 weeks intensively, and then we'll have 9 months together in the mastermind for implementation, for growth, for overcoming any obstacles that come up in your way, and for you to also collaborate with the other members of the mastermind. So that is, it's launched already. You can enroll now, and we start on the 6th of July. The other thing that I started this week, or that I brought back, if you've been following me for a while, you'll have seen this previously. It's a little thing I like to call the Daily Boost, and I've set it up this time as an email series that you can opt into. So if you go to the website lilybadcock.com, I'll put the link in the show notes. Right at the top of the homepage, you'll see that you can subscribe to the Daily Boost, and all it is are daily channeled messages from my soul to your inbox. So if you feel like you could do with a little daily dose of Lily, they're just very short, very snappy, inspiring, motivating emails. And they are largely taken from my own journaling over the years. So they are all of the things I've channeled in journaling that are just lessons I come back to time and time again. They're timeless. So you can opt in for that right now. It's a free series. So go to lilybadcock.com and sign yourself up for that. And don't forget to join me in Wake Up, Rise Up, the Facebook group. I'm in there live every Friday at 8 for channeled guidance and Q&A. So you can come on there. If there's anything that I talk about on this podcast and you want to come and chat about it or ask me questions, get into that Facebook group, join me in there. And I would love to see you on a future call. That leaves it for now. I'm going to wrap up there. Do go and check out my interview with Joe Milmine. It was amazing. Like I say, that's coming out the same time as this one. So if you're listening to this, you can also listen to that. And go over and check out the Confidence Academy as well, by the way. If you haven't checked that podcast out, I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. I've decided that moving forward, I'm going to be doing weekly content for that podcast as well as this one. So the Waking Up to Purpose is very much going to be more the channeled soul downloads, the spiritual guidance. The Confidence Academy was always and will always be about the overcoming anxiety and the mental health side of things. So depending on where you're at in any given moment, you may need one or the other. So go and check that out if you haven't already. Subscribe. Leave me a rate and review on iTunes if you're enjoying this podcast, and do it for that one as well if you can. And of course, please share all of this stuff with anyone you know that might find it helpful and help me get the word out. And I will be back again next week for another episode. Sending you lots and lots of love. Mwah. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with me further and the awesome community that this podcast is creating, then come and join me in my free Facebook group, Wake Up, Rise Up. Every Friday, you can join me for a live Q&A in that group, and the links to do that are in the show notes for this episode. If you love the show, please leave me a comment and review on iTunes and share with anyone you know who might love it too. In the meantime, have an awesome day and keep shining. It's time.